Chapter 1383. Since Jaina was his harem, Duque certainly could not watch Theramore be destroyed and Jaina fall into a state of madness or decadence. Jaina wanted to refute, but she immediately shut up. Just like 10 years ago, no one could imagine that there would be warships and fortresses flying in the sky. No one could guarantee that in 10 years, there would not be a terrifying magic bomb that even a demigod could not defend against. Times were changing and so was the situation. Theramore's prosperity benefited from the good relationship between the Horde and the Alliance. But what about the future? Jaina and Duque were immortals, but the chief of the Horde was not. Thrall was a wise leader, but what about his successor? Jaina would never forget the suffering she had when she was a young girl. For a moment, she almost thought that she was going to die in the icy Tirisful woodland at the hands of the cruel orcs. Every time he woke up in the middle of the night, he would think of those cruel and bloodthirsty green faces. Yes, that was the nature of the orcs. Unknowingly, she gritted her teeth until they creaked. Understood, I will move the civilian industries back to Kultiras. After all, the inscription on my crown is Queen Kultiras, not Queen Theramore. After venting her anger, Jaina's tone softened again. Hey, Duque, what did you say last time about the effective way to prevent large-scale bombing? Dig a hole. Dig a deep hole. Hide the most important things in the ground. I understand. Theramore was by the sea, so digging a hole was definitely a difficult task. However, Jaina's other title was the Ice Queen. After Duque became a demigod as the only Breaking Dawn in the Alliance, and Kultiras was good at building ships and waterproofing, Jaina had ways to solve the problem of underground water seepage. Once it succeeded, even if it was destroyed by nuclear weapons, Theramore would still be like a nail nailed to the throat of the Horde territory by the hidden forces in the bunker. But now it seemed that it was not too late to change the plan. The Alliance and the Horde were still in the honeymoon period, and it would continue for a long time before the Draenor migration was completed. Jaina had plenty of time to adjust. Hey Duque. Since Theramore can't be used as a commercial port, and the original Kultiras territory is too small, should I give my people another place to develop? Duque smiled bitterly. This pillow talk was amazing. With a wave of his hand, another map appeared in the air. Duque pointed at it and asked, What do you think of this place? Jaina's eyes widened. At first she was delighted, but then she hesitated. It's good, but Duque had a sneer on his face. These guys have never done anything good. You don't learn your lesson after being beaten. Instead you hold a grudge. Since they are destined not to join the Alliance, there is no need for them to exist. The Alliance will attack directly? Jaina was shocked. Of course not, we are a fair alliance. Looking at Duque's mischievous look, Jaina's face lit up with joy. Batty, no wonder I like you so much. Even though you broke off the engagement, she still threw herself at you. In September of the same year, something that was neither too big nor too small happened in the Alliance. In Stormwind's Stranglethorn Vale Expeditionary Force was cleaning up the remnants of the trolls and Zul, Gurub who believed in the evil god Hacker. A troop of trolls led by a priest broke through the encirclement of the kingdom's army and rushed into the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale. The Alliance attempted to chase after them, but they received a warning from the goblins in Stranglethorn Vale's hidden treasure bay, who claimed that the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale was their territory. Who knew that the Zul Gurub trolls, who hated all non-hacker believers, would sweep through the entire southern part of Stranglethorn Vale in a short month. The Gurubashi Arena, Thin Fog Valley, and even Hidden Treasure Bay were all taken over by the red-eyed trolls. The defensive line that the goblins had painstakingly built was pierced through again and again like paper. The mercenaries recruited from all over the world were like ducks being chased around, caught and killed by the trolls one by one. In the end, the goblins could no longer hold on. Just like when the Alliance sent out a request for help, another wave of trolls still trapped in Zul, Gurub began to rebel. Stormwind couldn't even take care of itself, and even the Stranglethorn Vale Expeditionary Force was almost caught in a pincer attack. Fortunately, the Alliance urgently transferred an air fleet and brought over the Marcus family's infantry regiment led by Windsor. Only then was the situation stabilized. In October of the 22nd year of the Dark Portal, the situation in the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale was already rotten beyond belief. Nearly 100,000 trolls had almost wiped out the goblins there. The Hot Sand Conglomerate, which controlled Hidden Treasure Bay, organized 2 large-scale landings in an attempt to recapture Stranglethorn Vale's territory, but both failed. As a last resort, the big boss of the Hot Sand Conglomerate, Goblin Baron Livigaz, once again asked for help from Stormwind and the Alliance. The regent of Stormwind, Bolvar, refused Livigaz's request on the grounds that the king was at war in the Outer Realm and that there were not enough troops, and told him to report to the alliance. In the middle of the same month, Duque rejected the request of the Hot Sand Conglomerate, which had previously claimed to be neutral, on the grounds that the alliance was sending more troops to the Outer Realm. At this point, the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale, together with the surrounding islands, was officially under the rule of the Zul-Gurub Troll Empire. In the tribe, it was not that there was no one who saw the possible tricks, but no one could do anything about it. The war between the alliance and the tribe in the Outer Realm was at its fiercest, and it was impossible for anyone to have the energy to take care of the trolls in Zul-Gurub. But everyone could foresee that the trolls there were like grasshoppers after autumn, and they would not be able to jump around for long. Once the war in the Outer Realm ended, when Stormwind or the Alliance recovered, it would be the death of the trolls in Zul-Gurub. After that, the territory in the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale would probably have nothing to do with the goblins. In Orgrimmar, Varrock Salyafar, who stayed behind, asked Wajin in a deep voice, "Let's do nothing, okay? What can we do? The Thunderspear trolls are not the Zul-Gurub trolls. The Rustwater conglomerate is not the Hot Sand conglomerate." What Wajin said was also true. From ancient times to the present, the trolls had not been a unified race. The same was true for the goblins. There were 5 trading princes among the goblins, and only the weakest prince of the Rustwater conglomerate, Gast Garavix, had joined the tribe. It was a different matter from the Hot Sand conglomerate. If the tribe rashly intervened, maybe the Hot Sand conglomerate would fight with the tribe first. Everyone could see that there was a huge hand behind this unusual event, and it was clearing all non-alliance forces out of the Eastern Kingdom. Perhaps in 3 or 5 years, the entire Eastern Kingdom would be a piece of iron. In fact, Wajin's guess was right. In Duque and Jaina's plan, when the Alliance and the Horde's Outer Realm Expeditionary Force returned to Azeroth, it would be the day when Kull, Gurub and Stormwind cleaned up the trolls in the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale. When the trolls who believed in the evil god Hacker were killed, Kull, Gurub would have a brand new main city in the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale. Chapter 1384. Duque had no qualms about swallowing the goblins' territory. In the game he felt that the goblins were notorious and disgusting. In Booty Bay and other places controlled by the Hot Sand conglomerate, if you accidentally touched the wrong mouse or used your magic staff to graze a goblin's skin, countless goblins would rush out from every corner to gang up on you. There was nowhere to run and they would beat you to death with a stick. Therefore, some players did not hesitate to rely on the Bloodsail pirates just to gang up on the goblins. In this life, illusion became reality. The goblins used the name of neutrality to do dirty things, which was even more exaggerated. Not to mention the most ruthless venture capital companies among the goblins, they were a classic example of evil. They dared to trample on all human laws with only a 300% profit. But the goblins could make something with a 3% profit turn into a 300% profit. Similarly, they also trampled on all laws. The milk seller mixed water into the milk, but these bastards mixed lime into the water. It was fine as long as it looked white. It did not matter if you died or not as long as you got the money. Later, after the Alliance did business with the goblins, they strengthened the inspection, regardless of the method or frequency. Duque also specially added probability to prevent Alliance merchants and official procurement personnel from being fooled. The result was good. For example, in order to strengthen the physical fitness of the next generation of Stormwind citizens, Duque proposed the slogan, "A cup of milk a day makes Stormwind strong." Did you know how the goblins fooled Stormwind City? Stormwind City had a lot of inspection methods, right? The goblins mixed cow urine into the milk. Anyway, whether it was steamed or dried, it was still cow components, right? They would give you, "A cup of urine a day makes a weak Stormwind person." Anyway, every time something was exposed, the goblins would push the person directly to the forefront. It was up to the goblins to kill them. Later on, there would be a second or even an infinite number of fellows who wanted to do business with the Alliance, especially the Marcus family in Stormwind. Because everyone knew that the Marcus family was rich. In the early years, the goblins organized various theft gangs to blow up Duque's family's treasury. After many failures, the theft turned into fraud. In any case, every time it was exposed, the goblins would immediately disassociate themselves and claim that it was done by their subordinates. They were absolutely neutral. Only a goblin who successfully swindles money from the Marcus family is an outstanding goblin. This kind of crazy and twisted values had become more and more intense during the period when Alicia was in charge of the Marcus family's finances. The goblins were like moths flying into a flame. Wave after wave of swindlers appeared, attempting to swindle the goblins and become famous among the goblins. It was only after Duque returned from the War of the Ancients and cut off all trade with the gnomes that they started to restrain themselves. The Alliance's cold treatment of the various groups of goblins was also an important reason for forcing the Rustwater conglomerate to lean towards the Horde. The Rusty Water conglomerate joined the tribe 10 years earlier than the original history. Although the tribe had obtained a lot of goblin technology, the consequences of introducing these cancerous tumors was really ha. So this time, the Alliance borrowed the hands of the trolls to clear the goblin forces in the entire Stranglethorn Vale. From the venture capital company camp in the middle of Stranglethorn Vale to Hidden Treasure Bay, one of the pillars of the hot sand conglomerate, Duque really had no psychological burden. When the Outland expedition was over, Duque would gradually reduce the living space of the goblins step by step. Perhaps one day there would be no more goblins in the entire Azeroth, and the world would really be much more peaceful. Duque opened up the magic network while controlling the war in Stranglethorn Vale. At the same time he also remotely controlled Mark Dooku, who was in the Outland. Out of bad taste, the name he used 10,000 years ago was attached to this doppelganger. Due to perfect control, this Mark also showed impeccable human habits. He needed to breathe, eat, drink, and defecate. Occasionally he would make mistakes when casting magic due to the scattered elements in the Outland. No one doubted that this high-end wizard who had fought side by side with them for so long was actually a puppet-like imitation. William and Thrall had a good time working together. From the middle of Hellfire Peninsula to the Dark Portal in the east, there was a path of glory. This was the path that the old Horde had taken when they gathered here and prepared to cross through space to attack Azeroth. Of course, looking at this path now, it was a little ironic. This was because the target that the old Horde had tried to conquer was now fighting back with the new Horde. Although it was to liberate the beastmen who were threatened by the Burning Legion, it still felt strange. In order to make each other feel at ease, on that day, after taking care of the demon army that had obstructed the Alliance army from entering the Outland, the Alliance and the Horde used the path of glory that traversed through Hellfire Peninsula as the dividing line. The south was controlled by the Alliance. With Fort Glory and the Vanguard camp at the Dark Portal as the core, a series of sentries and bunkers were built to form a line of defense and ensure the supply line. The north was handed over to the Horde. With the support of the Alliance's resources, the Horde only took 2 months to build a medium-sized fortress, Salma. From October onwards, the Alliance and the Horde split up and attacked Hellfire Fortress together. There were differences in the distribution of specific tasks. The Horde mainly dealt with the fell beastmen. They used as many non-lethal methods as possible, such as throwing nets and the tear-inducing aura provided by the Alliance, to capture their demonic brethren and imprison them and send them to the rear. The reason why these fell beastmen were so violent was because of the blood of the Lord of the Abyss. Magtheridon couldn't compare to his boss, Manaroth, but if the dosage was large, it would still be quite troublesome. Almost every day, close to 1,000 fell beastmen would be sent through the Dark Portal to the Warhammer camp in the northwest of the Blasted Lands. There, they would be treated by the Horde shaman's natural magic. After a certain amount of poison and demonic power was expelled from their bodies, they would be given Stratholme holy water and other methods to quickly get rid of the demonic blood in their bodies. Under the leadership of William, the Alliance broke through the walls of Hellfire Fortress and turned to attack Magtheridon's lair. On the 16th of October, Thomas suddenly received a notification from the mission announcer of Fort Glory, asking his team to head to Fort Glory to meet Daneth Trollbane. Thomas was overjoyed. Although the people of Stormguard had always wanted to meet this legendary next king, Daneth always did things according to the rules. They could meet for official matters of the Alliance, but they couldn't meet for private matters. Now that they finally had the chance to show their faces in front of the future king, Thomas and the others were rather excited. With Thomas and Duque in the lead, a few core members of the Highland Warrior group arrived at Fort Glory under the guidance of the guards. It had been a long time since Duque saw the 5 heroes of the Expeditionary Army, who were supposed to have statues erected in Stormwind City. He suddenly felt that his eternal youth was too much of a cheat. The handsome Daneth Trollbane from the second battle at the Dark Portal had now become a bald, white-haired old man. Chapter 1385. During the first years of the Dark Portal, even though Danas had the great surname of Trollbane, Salas did not show any favoritism. Salas, on the other hand, didn't show any favoritism. He made Danas start as a member of the militia. If not for the soul-stirring battle of the Dark Portal, perhaps Danas would have been like the collateral descendants of the large families, vanishing into the masses. After surviving the Second World War of the Dark Portal, guarding the Watchtower in the Cursed Lands, coming to the Outland and becoming the manager of the Glory Stronghold, Danas used his conscientious character to prove his reliability to the world. In terms of strength, Danas definitely could not compare to those fierce men of the same era. Whether it was in the original history or in this life, he did not have any outstanding records of fighting a strong enemy. Not everyone could become the hero that was the center of attention. Many times, a general who could guard a region was far rarer than a fierce general who could charge into battle and seize the flag. Danas was obviously this kind of general. Steady and reliable. Seeing him like this, Duque sighed. The once young commander who did not know the taste of worry. Now, under the ravages of time, if someone told Duque that Danas was 60 years old, Duque would probably believe it. Danas had a typical Mediterranean hairstyle with snow-white sideburns, a typical full beard and a face full of wrinkles. All 10 of his fingernails were black. If he wasn't dressed in military attire and had a pair of sharp, sword-like eyebrows, he would look like a typical old farmer. He had just turned 40 years old this year. Duque wondered if he should give him a quota of eternal life. Ever since Duque sold his Mount Onyxia to the Void battlefield, Alexstrasza had already obtained 50 quotas from Nozdormu for him. She also promised that as long as he asked, she would definitely give him enough. But even though Duque had received great benefits from these mortals, he would not casually give them away. Anything once overflowing would lose its value. Until now, Duque had only given Windsor and Big Van Cleef. Danas. After he returned from the Outland, he would give him another as a gift. Danas glanced at Thomas, then at Duque. He was stunned for a moment, but he quickly turned his gaze back to Thomas. Duque, who was in Karazhan, laughed out loud. Danas had such a reaction because before Duque had returned to participate in the Battle of the Ancients, he had put on a lot of makeup, almost to the point of plastic surgery. Apart from the black hair and black eyes, he looked like a completely different person. Many things could be changed, but a person's temperament was the hardest to erase. They were both wizards, and Danas easily thought of Duque from more than a decade ago. Back then, Duque was also at the weak Morning Star realm, and had a pair of deep eyes that were filled with wisdom. Of course, today's focus was on Thomas. Danas stood with his hands behind his back and focused on Thomas. Ever since we entered the Outland, the Highland Warriors Group's results have been pretty good. 132 missions with a completion rate of 95%. The mission release team gave you a rating of Legend, because even if you failed the missions, you faced powerful demons that required an entire army or a hero to deal with. To tell you the truth, I'm very satisfied. Thank you for your compliment, Trollbane. Marshal. Thomas actually wanted to call Danas Your Majesty, but he was stuck. In the end, he still called him by his military rank. The position of Marshal was given to Danas by order of Duque after communications with the Outland had been restored. Before the Third Battle of the Dark Portal, because of the chaos caused by Tarinas and the other countries, military ranks were generally too high, and there were more marshals. After being promoted, they could not be demoted, so most of the time, marshals did what generals did in the Second World War. Basically, the generals who could take charge of an area were all marshals. Danas was an upright soldier and was used to the excitement of his comrades. Thomas had not said anything wrong, and he had no intention of pursuing the matter. Alright, gentlemen, the Alliance would like to entrust you with a mission that is not mandatory. Because the danger level is quite high, there are no mandatory requirements for the results. This is an elite mission and the difficulty is high, so the points and rewards will be doubled. How many points and rewards you get will depend on your results. Thomas was excited and immediately stood at attention. We will do our best to complete the mission. Don't agree too early. The Alliance needs a small to medium-sized team that's strong and smart enough to open up the connection between Glory Castle and Shotrath City that was once severed. Also, they need to collect the topographic map along the way. This isn't an easy task. Danas smiled, his weather-beaten face had deep wrinkles. He was no longer young, but he envied the drive of those young people. Thomas had just turned 28, and was at the best age for a man. He was strong and had a lot of battle experience. As an old soldier who had experienced many wars, Danas boasted that he could see through 99% of people, but he found that he could not see through this Mark Dooku. In his 20 years in the army, Danas had seen all kinds of mages. Most of them were from the Dalajan and Stormwind City's Royal Magic Academy. Those little fellows were like flowers in a greenhouse, and needed a long time to adapt before they could become qualified battle mages. But Mark was different. In his eyes, there was no fear of the unknown, nor was he the kind of young man who had just entered the battlefield, fearless because of ignorance. His wise eyes seemed to be able to see through all the fog in the world. This was a calmness and magnanimity that did not match his age. According to the information, this mage Kultiras should have been unorthodox and not suitable for such an important mission. Danas noticed that this Mark Dooku's identity was actually from Kultira's court. Danas thought to himself, maybe he's a disciple of some court mage who came out to train. Suddenly, Danas's confidence in this mission increased. You also know that the Alliance commander, His Excellency Duke Marcus, has become a demigod of the weave, right? Thomas and Duque nodded at the same time. Danas nodded to a white-bearded old mage beside him. The old mage said, more than 20 years ago the Alliance still relied on people riding griffins. Most of the time they could only send messages on horseback. But today the Alliance can no longer do without magic. The Outland is a place where magical elements are quite unstable. Since the second battle of the Dark Portal, the Alliance has been using magic to send messages. It seems very bad here. Sometimes we can guarantee continuous communication for a few hours, and sometimes we can't contact the outpost 3 miles away for a few weeks. Chapter 1386. The first thing you need to do is to go southwest from Glory Castle and enter the Thorn Path. Set up a magic communication relay device every 5,000 yards. With them, we can guarantee communication in 99% of cases. Make sure they are in a safe place and not destroyed by monsters. Also mark them well. Your basic mission is completed. After saying that, the old mage bowed to show that he was done. Donna spoke again, next is the follow-up mission for the advancement. For every additional part completed, there will be double or even triple the points and rewards. The details are written in the report. First, if possible, try to reach Shotrath City. The Alliance urgently needs information on Shotrath City. Finally, if possible, try to escort at least one emissary from Shotrath City back. The mission was clear and the direction was clear. There was nothing much to say. Since entering the Outland, Thomas and the other Highland Knights had mostly taken on missions to clear the monsters around Glory Castle. They were very familiar with the terrain and the way to fight monsters. And this time, there was a big bug mount that was completely different from the Alliance. Although it affected the appearance of the city, it had to be said that the Karaji bug mount was really useful. It had a high IQ and could basically understand the master's thoughts under the control crystal. Not afraid of death, able to fight, even if the bug was thrown to cover the rear, it wouldn't complain. It could climb mountains and wade rivers, and it wasn't picky with food. It could eat dead monsters, rotten meat, rotten wood, and even its dead companions could become food. Basically, other than being ugly, it was all good points. Everyone was quite disgusted with the Alliance letting go of those bugmen who had killed so many of their compatriots. As the war went on, everyone accepted these strong bugs. The Horde had the battle wolves, the Alliance had the bugs. It sounded a notch lower, but it felt more useful than the battle wolves. Moral integrity was not as valuable as life. No taste, no moral integrity or life was more important. As long as one was in the middle or lower ranks, they would choose it. And the bug mount could be replenished endlessly. Delicate things like battle horses were not so easy to replenish. The mission was decided. At this moment, in the bedroom on the top floor of Karazhan, Jaina reclined on the chaise longue, elegantly sipping a mouthful of black tea. Then she put down the exquisite white porcelain cup and quietly watched the internet addict demigod play games. Of course, she didn't know that Dumuk's dream before he transmigrated was to have his own game room with a big screen and top-notch equipment. Even playing Minesweeper with a 4-way Titan graphics card was a decadent and depraved game. On the contrary, Jaina felt that Duque, who was working hard, was very charming. Due to the damage to his Azeroth astral soul, he had no choice but to stay behind. He had no way to conduct the frontline command that he loved the most, and he had no way to personally participate in the great adventure against the evil enemies. Yet, he was still able to find joy in this kind of situation, using his imagination to find a new solution. Sure enough, only a man like this was qualified to possess her in such a domineering manner. He even made her accept the fact that she was just a part of his harem without any complaints or regrets. Hey Duque, are you really not going to consider directly intervening in the affairs of the Outlands? Jaina asked as she rested her chin on her hand. Duque shook his head. Now that I think about it, even if I didn't want to stay here, I shouldn't have gone to the Outer Realms. Now, Kil'jaeden and I can be considered to be trading pieces. Duel? Indeed, if Duque did not go to the Outer Realms, he would be able to avoid the traps set by the Burning Legion in the Outer Realms. Duque did not move and Elun was also there, so they would be restraining Kil'jaeden. However, Duque used a remote control method to solve the problem of him not being able to directly participate in the battle. If it was any other powerhouse, they would most likely not be able to affect the overall situation because they had switched to a clone. Duque was a weirdo. As a transmigrator, he had used his intelligence to kill countless strong enemies. He believed that this time would not be an exception. Anyway, even if he really lost, it would only be a clone and he could make it in half a day. Although I don't have unlimited revivals this time, I will play the Clone War with you. Let's see if you're afraid. The next day Thomas and the rest were ready. The Highland warriors had 38 people, a total of 120 insect mounts. It could be said that one person rode 3 mounts. They majestically set off from the south gate of Honor Castle, taking a detour to the thorny path. After leaving Honor Castle, Duque looked at the sky and secretly sighed. "What's wrong?" Thomas asked. "Nothing, it's just that I can't get used to this kind of world." "Indeed. No matter how many times I see it, I won't get used to it. This sky that was close to eternal night. There was no sun, no clouds, there was only blurred and illusory darkness. From time to time, an unknown bolt of lightning would flash through the sky, piercing through the boulders that were spinning in the sky. The gravity was obviously normal, but there were boulders floating in the sky. There was no sunlight, but the closer they got to the scarlet dry ground, the brighter it became. This kind of unscientific scenery felt strange no matter how one looked at it. From the reddish-brown hill where Honor Castle was located, if one followed the slope down, they would be surrounded by enemies. Anything that did not have an alliance insignia would attack you. Gulp, a sound that the recruits could not understand sounded from afar. Thomas and the rest immediately frowned. Immediately, a violent cloud of dust rose from afar. Hellboar, a dark elf scout had long since shouted from the left wing. Hellboar, a typical wild beast that had mutated due to the overflow of demonic blood. It had the extremely strengthened body of a demonic creature, as well as the instinctive ferocity of a wild beast. This thing roamed the entire Hellfire Peninsula. Almost every week, the Alliance would specially organize a hunt for it. Unfortunately, it could only reduce its numbers, but it was unable to completely eradicate this terrifying species. The Hellboar itself was not very strong in close combat. What was scary was its charge. Under a full charge, the Hellboar's tusks had once destroyed a new model tank. This wasn't an old-fashioned steam tank, but the Alliance's latest diesel tank. In the outer lands, because of the unstable air pressure, the steam engine starting condition was quite bad. The Alliance had no choice but to send the latest diesel tank to test it. Although diesel also had all sorts of problems, at least it could be used and it had more horsepower. The dwarves had installed an even more insane 130mm steel plate on the side of the tank. Even so, it had been directly pierced through, instantly destroying the engine and ammunition compartment, as well as losing 3 elite dwarf tank soldiers. Seeing this berserk Hellboar charge over, Thomas frowned on the spot. If hit by that big thing, at least 2 or 3 bug mounts would be destroyed. Although the bugs were not bad in close combat, their relatively thin legs had always been their weakness. Bug mounts had no way of dealing with the charge. "I'll do it," Duque said softly. Lightly, a hole as thick as an arm appeared under the Hellboar's front hooves. The Hellboar's charge became the biggest killer. The instant its left front leg sank into the ground, its charge and weight directly tore off its entire leg. Chapter 1387. The Dry Land, the Howling Wind. The atmosphere was scorching hot, devoid of any signs of life. What did not match the atmosphere was the team's atmosphere. "Wow! Ah!" The team members all screamed and jumped in joy. If it was any other team, the most common method would be to send a strong professional, preferably a defensive warrior, to take the Hellboar's charge head-on, then drag it into a battle of attrition, slowly whittling down this thick-skinned demon boar. There was no other way. Creatures that had been demonized were generally very strong. But now there was a newbie rider, a big shot, personally controlled by Duque Mark Dooku. That was to turn something rotten into something magical. Unless it was an undead creature, no one would be able to endure tearing off a leg while sprinting at high speed. The Hellboar, which only had 3 legs left, screamed in pain. It struggled madly, venting the rage in its heart, trying to use its hooves and horns to kill any creature that approached it. If this was a mission issued by Honor Castle, they would probably have to fight a fierce battle to take care of this thing, but they had a more important mission. "Mantis Shrimp, let's go." Duque patted the red bug mount he was riding. The insect let out a low hum, then moved its 4 sharp and long legs and ran away. "Ah, awesome." Thomas and the others laughed and followed. The Hellfire Peninsula was a hellish place, a world where the strong preyed on the weak. If they left this 3-legged boar that weighed more than 2 tons here, it would not live for long. Moreover, this place was not far from Honor Castle. The guards on the guard tower had already seen this scene. Just because Duque and the others did not accept the mission didn't mean that others did not. As a matter of fact, there were already other teams eagerly rushing out to take advantage of the situation. Thomas and Duque did not care. The group of people swaggered off. The bug mount was very fast, over 40 kilometers per hour. But because of the strange curvature of the bug's legs and multi-joint shock absorption, it was not as bumpy as a horse. Not long after, the towering Honor Castle behind them disappeared into the horizon. A day later, the outermost guard tower in the southwest of Honor Castle was also left behind. The team had completely left Glory Castle's territory. Yeah. Thomas used a very standard charging movement while holding a lance that was over 5 meters long in his hands. The sharp spearhead accurately pierced through the head of a steel-toothed marauder while moving at high speed, and the rather tough head of the marauder directly exploded like a rotten watermelon. Purple blood splattered in all directions. At the same time, the center of the spear that was supposed to slow down the momentum of the knight and the lance exploded. Let's go. Thomas did not stop and called for everyone to continue the assault. This insect also had a four-legged pedestal-like base. Its lower body was very similar to the Karaji insect people, but its Magata-like upper body was abnormally ugly. However, its mouth full of buck teeth was not just for decoration. Duque had personally seen an Alliance knight get his upper body bitten off less than 20 meters in front of him. Please note that the entire upper body was bitten off together with the 5 mm thick plate armor. From another aspect, this reflected that Thomas's shot was quite exquisite. For a giant insect with high speed and agility, he could still change the direction of the spearhead while charging at high speed along with the head of the steel-toothed marauder. This skill was like stabbing a matchbox with the spearhead at 60 kilometers per hour. Was amazing. Should it be said that he was worthy of the title of Highland Knight? Along the way there were no hordes of monsters, but there were still all kinds of losses. 3 Kiraji insect mounts had their legs broken. Because they had just set out, their supplies were still quite full. They could only move the most important supplies, abandon the excess goods, and let the 2 insects fend for themselves. 2 cavalrymen from Lordaeron were ambushed by a void demon. Half of their bodies were swallowed and there was no need to pull them out. Only half of them were left on the spot. Duque used a round of arcane missiles to finish off the void demon, which could be considered revenge. After spending 3 days, the team arrived at the thorny path. Looking at the scene, almost everyone frowned. Isn't this too dangerous? Thorns were thorns, yes, but the roots were huge thorny plants that needed 2 people to wrap their arms around. It was a nightmare. The only path was an arched passageway in the thorns that could accommodate 2 carriages side by side. This was the so-called path. In theory this could lead to the Taraka forest, but no one knew what was in this path, or if the path would become smaller and smaller after entering. In the end, they were tragically stuck inside, unable to advance or retreat. Thomas used his spare knight's spear to poke at the thorns, and found that the spear was not sharp enough. If a person were to collide with it, gulp, everyone could not help but swallow their saliva. Finley, can you do anything? Thomas called out to a night elf. As a member of the Cenarian Expeditionary Force, Finley Swiftspear was specially transferred here for this mission. This elite druid looked at it, carefully sensed it, and shook his head. No. The land here is full of corrosion and decay, my power is not enough to affect the land here. Not to mention these thorns that have been here for at least 1,000 years. Thomas looked at Duque again, and Duque also shook his head. These hardened thorns were quite resistant to fire even if they were dead. If Duque's main body was here, he would have flattened it. Finally, he looked at the sky and soon Thomas gave up. There were still many flying beasts wandering in the sky. They circled back and forth, gauging each other's strength. From time to time, a raptor would suddenly attack another, and then feathers, blood, and even organs would fall from the sky. The prize for the winner was the corpse of the loser. The Alliance tried to send a team of griffins over, but only 1 griffin knight returned alive, and he died not long after. Let's go in. I'll go first. Shaking his head, Thomas took the lead and rode the worm into the thorny path. The dense thorns quickly blocked out all external light. Even with a torch in hand, they still had the vague feeling that they would die the next moment, and be impaled on the thorns. This was a path that no one had used for at least 10 years. If not for the fact that most of the thorns had died due to the decay of the land, such a path would have long been covered by plants. Even so, the team was still extremely careful. The only fortunate thing was that Duque gave way to a dozen fireballs. The team formed a long snake formation around them, allowing the light to be slightly better. At this moment, Thomas, who was at the front, suddenly heard a scream coming from a place further ahead. Someone was attacked. Chapter 1388. There were people in front of the thorny path? Thomas's first reaction was that it was impossible. Before he left, he had already confirmed that his team was the only one sent by Honor Castle. Now, the main force of the Alliance was besieging Hellfire Citadel under the leadership of King Varian, and no matter how far the Alliance scouts went, they could not pass through Zangermarsh, which was further west of Hellfire Peninsula. Now the entrance to the swamp was filled with a thick poisonous fog. Before the Cenarian Expeditionary Army's druids purified the fog, no one could pass through. Could it be Dreenii? Duque finished Thomas's words. Perhaps this was the only explanation. The situation in the Outland was quite chaotic, and the major forces were intertwined with each other. Kale, that must have sat on his private phoenix and brought his underlings along the way, flying to the northernmost stronghold of the storm to help the Dreenii guard their home. In the southern Taroka forest, he threw a team of his own there, and they directly became Shotrath City's astrologer. That was it. Although the Dreenii would not be completely wiped out, what could they do with such a scattered force? In the center of the Outland were the two pits of Hellfire Citadel and Zangermarsh, which blocked the way. What made the Alliance angry the most was that Thrall did not control his subordinates, or rather, those guys had been harboring evil intentions for a long time. Kargith Bladefist, this guy who died in the dark portal of Azeroth in this life and was resurrected by Sun King as a forgotten warrior hero, actually rebelled and announced that he would accept the power of the Burning Legion as an undead. He also regained control of the Shattered Palm clan and ran to the Shattered Hall of Hellfire Citadel to become the boss. Thrall was exasperated and turned to attack the Shattered Hall. Other than Kargith, there was also the chieftain of the Blood Ring clan, Kilrog Deadeye, and the chieftain of the Bone Gnawing clan, Harkin Cranium Splitter. In this life they were killed in the Dark Portal and were also resurrected by Sun King. Like Kargith, they had also served Nazul under Kill Jaden's control. After being resurrected, they did nothing until they returned to the Outland. Only then did they reveal their ferocious fangs and raise the flag of rebellion. Unlike Kargith, Kilrog and Harkan were nowhere to be found. Duque suddenly had a feeling that the situation in front was related to these two chieftains who had run off. Charge. Thomas jumped down from the Zerg and raised his excellent shield up high. He drew his one-handed sword and rushed to the front. Then, with the illumination spell that Duque cast on his shield, he managed to distinguish the things in front of him and moved as fast as he could. Don't come over. Don't come any closer. A sobbing voice came from ahead. It was a female Dreenii. Thomas and the others didn't understand, but Duque heard everything clearly with the help of the translation software. That's right. It's a Dreenii. Duque's words made Thomas advance even faster. Thomas carefully placed the upper part of the large kite shield on his visor, revealing only half of his helmet. Using the gap in his helmet, he tried his best to look into the distance. He was close. He was close. It was getting closer and closer. Thomas brought Duque, Findlay, and a few other experts and rushed over first. After running for about 3 minutes, they saw their target. How should I put it? The current situation was rather comical. There were two huge and twisted vines, and in the narrow gap between the two vines, a blue-skinned Dreenii girl squeezed herself in. She seemed to have used a hammer to smash the small thorns in the middle of the vines so that she wouldn't get hurt and could hide from the pursuit of the two steel-toothed raiders. However, even though the two frenzied raiders couldn't squeeze into the narrow gap between the vines, they still used everything they had to attack the Dreenii girl. Their sharp claws kept going in and out, scratching the inside. The gap wasn't very deep. Even if the girl squeezed in with all her might, she still couldn't avoid the sharp claws that reached the end. Her butt happened to be facing outwards. Because of their body shape, the Dreenii's butt was more perky. As a result, the girl's butt suffered and was scratched by the sharp claws again and again. The fresh blood stimulated these mutated monsters, and they seemed to become even more violent. Duque was the first to make a move, using the old trick of Calm and Mind plus Flame Blast. No matter when it was used, it was always high-end and classy. The sudden burst of light frightened the two steel-toothed darters. The one in front tried to dodge to the right, but in its haste, it was pierced by a large thorn spike. In the next moment, it turned into a barbecued meat skewer. Of course, no one would want to eat the barbecue meat of the steel-toothed raiders. Originally, the other raider wanted to run, but Finley directly smashed Starfire on the raider's head, which instead aroused the ferocity of the beast. It let out a sharp cry and rushed over recklessly, just in time to meet Thomas's charge. Bang! With a loud noise, Thomas directly slammed its whole body into a thorn, and a dozen sharp thorns pierced its body from behind. Even so, it was still fine. It twisted its body frantically, trying to use its claws to kill Thomas and drag him down with it. How could Thomas, who was already prepared, give it this chance? Almost at the moment when charge hit the target, he immediately activated Counterattack Windstorm. The raiders' fierce attacks, which were as dense as raindrops, were all withstood by the thick fine shield. With the support of the warrior profession's unique fury, Thomas made an attack that exceeded the limits of his normal body. The long sharp sword seemed to turn into a dagger, quickly and ruthlessly stabbing into the raider's abdomen. 1 slash, 2 slashes, 3 slashes, a total of 20 slashes, almost turning the raider's entire abdomen into minced meat. The two beasts died and the atmosphere immediately eased. Looking at the humans standing outside, the Dreamy-Eye girl was still in a state of shock. "It's okay. Please don't be afraid. We are Alliance soldiers invited by your leader, Willen, to Shotrath City." Duque opened his mouth and spoke in the extremely pure Dreamy-Eye language. This made Thomas and the others quite envious. There was clearly more than one hero who saved the damsel in distress, so why was Mark Dooku the only one to claim credit? Helplessly, other than him, no one else knew Dreamy-Eye language. "You are, humans?" Unexpectedly, the Dreamy-Eye girl actually knew human common language with a thick accent. It was a little awkward, but they could still understand it. Everyone, including Duque, immediately realized they had picked up a treasure. "Yes, we are humans." "That's right, who taught you the common language? Those blood elves?" "Astrologer?" "Yes, Lord Willen instructed me that in order to better communicate with the human-led alliance, it would be best for me to learn the common language. These days I have been studying very hard and it seems like it has come in handy." As the Dreamy-Eye girl spoke, she bared her teeth and crawled out from the gaps of the vines. Chapter 1389. On the surface she was covered in blood and was in bad shape. Duque could tell at a glance that the girl was very lucky. They were all superficial wounds that could be healed with a healing spell. Unexpectedly, just as Duque was about to call for a priest, the girl actually started healing herself with holy light. Oh, and a priest? Taking advantage of this moment, Duque sized up the Dreamy-Eye girl. The girl had a figure similar to that of a human female, slim and slender. If it wasn't for the faint lines of her biceps on her arms, one would probably think she was a young lady just by looking at her silhouette. Her light blue skin glowed with holy light, and the girl was bathed in a holy aura. Although in Duque's eyes this level of holy light was still very shallow. She had two S-shaped curved goat horns on her head, and below her knees were recurved hooves that were a little unthinkable for humans. For balance, the girl's body also seemed to have become curvy in both the front and the back. There was no gorgeous clothing. The Dreamy-Eye girl was dressed like a typical commoner girl. The white linen top only covered her well-developed outland peaks. It seemed to be a typical off-the-shoulder outfit for ease of movement. The top that went from below her ribs to her neck made her neck look even more slender. A pair of leather pants that should have been brown had now turned dark red due to the blood staining them. She carried what in theory was a short warhammer in her hand, but in Duque's eyes, it was just a wooden stick and a metal lump. Duque noticed that there was no blood on the head of the warhammer. There wasn't even any blood left behind. A rookie on the battlefield for the first time? Duque really didn't know why Wayloan would send such a rookie to die. In the chaotic outland, it was enough for her to die 100 times. But no matter how he looked at it, this guy's luck was EX+. If she had the ability to come to the thorny path alone, she actually ran into the once-in-a-century Alliance advance team. "Excuse me, can you please turn around?" "Aye." The Dreamy-Eye girl's face was red. While Thomas was still in a daze, Duque had already come to a realization. She felt that her buttocks had been pierced by the flying man's sharp leg. Now that she was going to heal herself, it was really indecent to be injured there. Duque thought for a moment. Seeing that this guy wouldn't have a high-end item like a storage space bag, he directly handed over a piece of canvas. "Thank you." The girl's face turned even redder, like a freshly steamed prawn, and she quickly took the canvas. A few minutes later, Thomas met up with the rest of the army, and the Dreamy-Eye girl's wound was also healed. Seeing the large canvas patch on the girl's but Thomas, the silly goose, suddenly came to a realization. The girl was quite clever with her hands because Duque also saw a hole above her butt. The edge of the hole was even smoothed out, so that the Dreamy-Eye's nearly half-a-meter-long blue tail could be seen. What a nimble tail. It wagged and wagged, bending left and right. Duque couldn't help but think of when he was taming dragons. Sometimes, he would get Onyxia in human form to give him a red tail that was proportional to a human's body for him to rub. Every time he saw the strange dizziness on the Black Dragon Princess' face and heard her moans, Duque would feel very satisfied. This was like stroking a cat, addictive. Suddenly, the dreamy-eyed girl screamed, attracting everyone's attention. Only then did Duque realize that his hand was cheap. He actually reached out to grab her tail and rub it. Sorry, I was too curious. Is this the first time you've seen a dreamy-eye? Yes. Duque lowered his head. My companion didn't mean to offend you. We're actually all very curious, Thomas hurriedly explained. No. It's okay, it's not your fault. But please don't touch a dreamy-eye's tail so casually in the future. They usually get angry, especially males. The girl lowered her head. Then the girl took a deep breath and raised her head. There was a look of self-encouragement on her face. Even though there was still fear in her eyes, she tried her best to encourage herself and clenched her small fists. Please forgive me for being flustered. I've never killed anyone before, large creatures. My name is Imriel and I'm Karabayer's apprentice. Are you the vanguard sent by the Alliance? Looks like the holy light is really on my side today. Then I'm willing to go with you. Let's go to a safe place first. Hearing this signature introduction, Duque and Karazhan, who knew how many light years away, felt as if he was struck by lightning. There was only one voice in his mind: what the heck? It's actually hooves? How is this possible? As for having the same name, that was impossible. Among the Dreenii, their mother of holy light would never give them the same name. In Duque's mind, there were 100,000 rhinoceroses galloping. It was as if every rhinoceros was grunting in a strange voice, F***ck your lungs. F***ck your kidneys. If all the major events that Duque had experienced before basically overlapped with the historical events in his mind, then it would match up. Then now this matter was definitely a mess. According to the original history, this dreamy-eyed girl Imriel, who was affectionately called Hooves by countless players, would only appear in the 6th version of World of Warcraft, King of Draenor. Normally that would be at least 30 years after the Dark Portal. Why would she appear at this time? No. The Dreenieye's lifespan was already extremely long. Didn't you see that the 3 leaders of Eridar from 25,000 years ago were still alive and kicking? Didn't you see that even after 10,000 years, the Eridar twins were still as beautiful as flowers? If Imriel lived for 8 to 10 years, it would be equivalent to 2 to 3 days for humans. Regarding this deviation in history, Duque was convinced. I'm Thomas Faddick, a warrior, the captain of the advance party that the Alliance sent to Shotrath City. I'm Mark Dooku, a mage, the vice-captain of the advance party. After a round of self-introductions, everyone finally knew. At this time, Shotrath City was being attacked again. The one leading the army was actually Kilrog Deadeye, who had just defected from the Horde and ran over to Illidan's camp. Shotrath City had never really been restored, even with the addition of some blood elves, who were the current astrologers. Shotrath City was still in a precarious situation. Willan, that quack, claimed to have seen the future. He had a premonition that there would be an Alliance team heading towards Shotrath City from here to seek contact. So, even though he was in a state of shortage of troops, he still sent a team of 20 people to provide support. However, not every Dreenii who received the protection of the Holy Light would be immortal. It was not easy for them to get out of the secret path. Before the group of 20 could even walk out of the Terakar forest, they were attacked by their former comrades who were now the Broken to the north of Turum, the former Dreenii settlement. Chapter 1390. The Broken were once a race of Dreenii who were influenced by the power of the Burning Legion. Many of them had lost their rationality and ego due to various circumstances, or changed their appearance and temperament. The current batch of breakers were the brainless ones. After sacrificing half of their companions, they were lucky enough to escape and entered the Thorn Trail. They were then surrounded by dozens of Steelfang marauders, and in the end only Hoof Imriel was left. The original captain and vice-captain were all killed on the way. Duque scratched his head and thought, is this the lucky E of the ancient Wakon? But this was war. Although high-end martial arts could be used as the deciding factor, most of the time, it still depended on the efforts of mortals to tilt the scales of victory in their favor. Duque felt a little sorry for the Dreenii. After transmigrating for so long, Duque had seen many worlds. But now, Duque finally had a taste of what it felt like to continue to hold on to a world that was about to fall into the abyss of hell. He could not help but recall the rich elven forest. Even though it was once burned by the flames of war spread by the beastmen, with the washing of time and the efforts of mortals, it was still able to recover. And not this land that was getting more barren by the day. Let's go. To Shotrath, Thomas said, but realized that Imriel did not move. It was obvious that this Draenei was acting out what it meant to be a rookie trembling. That was really trembling. The trembling was even more obvious on her tail. That was because every member of the Alliance team was riding on a large bug. These bugs looked very tame. But no matter how she looked at them, they were no different from the Steelfang marauders that almost took her life. Come on, it's okay. Thomas, who was riding on the bug, gently reached out his hand. Imriel looked left and right and said weakly, Mr. Dooku, can I ride on the same mount as you? At this moment, Thomas's body suddenly stiffened, and the expression on his face froze. It was not hard to imagine that his single dog heart received 100,000 points of critical damage at this moment. The bystanders couldn't help but wonder if a gust of evil wind would blow in the next second and cause his entire body to be eroded and dissipate with the wind. Duke's face was full of embarrassment. In Karazhan, Jaina slammed the table and laughed. Duke, I didn't expect you to be able to provoke the little girl even though you're controlling an avatar. Wow. Is this the legendary fatal invisible flirting? What else could Duke do when the other party had already said so? Mark, who was controlled by Duke, smiled and said, It's my honor, madam. There's another advantage to sitting behind me. At least you don't have to be afraid of being pricked by the edges of the armor. If that was the case, then forget it. I've never ridden a mount before. Can I sit in the front? I'm afraid I'll fall off. Thomas received an additional 1 million points of critical damage to his soul. Sure. While riding on it, Imriel noticed a detail. She noticed that there was a line of words engraved on the hard shell of the worm's neck. Mount Akina. This is... Duke's face turned red, but he immediately put on a serious face. There's no time to explain. Get on. Oh no, get on quickly. Oh okay. The newbie was pure. She realized that she had been delayed here for too long. Now that her capital was under siege, and her people were constantly being sacrificed, she was still dawdling here. She even needed Mark, an ally, to remind her. She really shouldn't have done that. At that moment, Imriel couldn't help but respect Duke. With someone leading the way, the rest of the matter was much simpler. They still needed to pass through those few areas. Under Imriel's lead, the Alliance's advance party could avoid many places where monsters gathered. While looking for a place to insert the magic net signal booster, they pushed forward. The advance party spent 5 days and finally passed through the thorny rocky grounds, bypassing Turum, and arrived at the southwest of Shotrath City. Shotrath City was the capital of the Draenei people of Draenor. Another meaning of its name was where the holy light is. After Kill Jaden deceived Nazul and provoked the orcs to start a war against the Draenei, a fierce battle broke out here. Although the Draenei held fast to the capital, Shotrath City still fell. The entire city was reduced to ruins until Shotar came here. Originally, this place had already begun to be rebuilt. Although the progress was incomparably slow, it was indeed being rebuilt. Unexpectedly, after Illidan returned to the Outland, in order to make the entire Outland his strongest backing, he began to purge all those who opposed him. At that moment, the sound of war drums outside could be heard even a few kilometers away, reaching the center of Shotrath City. Unlike the tense atmosphere of the battle outside, the center of Shotrath City was quiet. Shotrath City had a strange structure. In the center there was an incomparably huge hemispherical hall. The buildings of the Draenei all had a similar style. This hall was a bit like the Temple of Karabaer, the Draenei's holy land. It was supported by huge gray-brown pillars. In between the gaps of the stone building, it was all dazzling purple and blue glass. The pointed leaf-shaped doors were stacked one after another. No matter when it looked like a beautiful work of art. In the center of the hall, there was a human figure made of countless golden leaf-like fragments floating in the air. That was the synonym for holy light, Naru. This kind of energy creature with a strong sense of self was the most resolute existence against the Burning Legion. In front of the surging energy of the Naru's seat, even the most bloodthirsty warrior would be at peace, and the most exhausted believer would be in awe. In front of the seat of Naru, anyone who glanced at it from afar would receive great comfort from the pillar of holy light. In front of the seat of Naru, Valen carefully recalled the clues he had recently sensed about the future, trying to discern the deep or shallow connections between them. Over the past few months, he had sensed more and more fragmented clues. The Draenei prophet crossed his legs under his body and put his hands on his old knees. When he meditated, the crystal seemed to respond to his power. It shone, pulsed, and danced around him in a chaotic but not orderly way. Countless illusions that could happen in the future were surging towards him. Once again he sensed a variable full of hope coming from the east. At this moment, on the wide passage of Shotrath City, Garrison Officer Maralad was holding a huge crystal warhammer, fighting against those hateful beastmen. These guys looked no different from 20 years ago. He was very tired. Even if the holy light gave him endless courage, it still could not completely offset the exhaustion of his body. At this moment his hooves slipped, causing him to fall to his knees. Seeing an incomparably filthy broken axe about to chop his neck, he could even feel the aura of death emanating from the poorly made axe blade with a few notches. Suddenly the tribe blew the horn to retreat. What happened? Chapter 1391. The Draenei were at an absolute disadvantage. Although they had the support of the Holy Light and could theoretically heal their wounds endlessly, the Holy Light was not omnipotent. The blood lost in the wound could not flow back into the body, and the lost strength could only be recovered through rest. Unless there was a high concentration of Holy Light, there was no way to defend against knives, axes, and clubs. In the face of an enemy 10 times their size, the advantage of the Holy Light had been worn out. If it were not for the magic support of the astrologer, Shotrath City would have been breached long ago. It could be foreseen that if the situation did not improve, it would be a repeat of 25 years ago, and the Draenei would once again lose in a war of attrition. The orcs used blood and lives to wear down Shotrath City. However, the loud sound of war drums, the clanging of weapons, the moans of the dying struggling on the ground, and the angry roars, all the sounds were stopped by the sound of the retreat horn. What happened? Every warrior on the battlefield had a confused expression. Last time, the one who saved Shotrath City from destruction was the blood elf who had now become an astrologer. Who was it this time? No one. In the desolate sky there was nothing. Ordinary birds and beasts had long been scared away by the loud noise. In the distance, the fell orcs who had learned their lesson, had sent back and forth patrolling wolf riders. There were no reinforcements in sight. What drove Illidan's lackeys to give up the victory that was within their grasp? There was only one answer. It was a blue flag that had been raised beside the Draenei's holy light war flag in Shotrath City. None of the Draenei had seen this war flag. Legend had it that the flag of the alliance from another world, which had reached a preliminary alliance with the Draenei, was also blue. But that flag had a lion on it and this one was a tornado. Could it be that this flag scared the enemy away? That was impossible, right? The Draenei garrison officers almost forgot to breathe, and looked at this scene with an expression that they had never seen before. Not to mention them, even the Draenei maiden Irel who had just raised the flag was so shocked that her jaw almost dropped. Her teeth were chattering. It actually scared off those ferocious orcs? Thomas, who was standing at the side, was also extremely shocked. Of course he recognized this flag, or rather he had grown up listening to the legend of this flag. This Storm Duke flag was the symbol of an era, a living legend. One flag to repel an army of 10,000. No one had expected that the miracle that had happened in Kuel Salas's Silvermoon City, which had been sung about by countless bards in the taverns, would repeat itself. Duque was already a demigod. Of course he wouldn't bother to boast about himself. Even if he did not do so, Thomas and the other spectators would naturally tell Imriel about the legend of the flag. In an instant the little girl had turned into a fangirl. Even her gaze towards the Storm War flag had become filled with some kind of fanaticism. It wasn't her fault. In recent decades the Draenei had been bullied by the orcs. As outsiders of Draenor, how could the orcs give them face? Long before the orcs, under the instigation of Nazul, started a full-scale war against the Draenei, both sides already had a feud. All kinds of border conflicts and mutual harm had long been the foreshadowing of this great war. It was just that at that time, the orcs lived a scattered lifestyle with clans as units. The Draenei also tried their best to suppress themselves under Valen's persuasion. But so what? The orcs took pride in killing the Draenei. The brave Draenei, their fathers and brothers had their heads chopped off and made into specimens, which were hung on the war flags of various clans. Their wives and daughters were used as food to feed the bloodthirsty war wolves. And all of this came to an end with the unparalleled war that lasted for several years, as well as the fall of Shotrath City. Battle after battle, defeat after defeat. Defeat after defeat. This was the portrayal of the Draenei. Today the evil orcs came again. With hope for the light, the Draenei once again tried to defend their holy city, but no one had really imagined the taste of success. They relied purely on courage to support themselves. That kind of desperate struggle and the feat of easily scaring away the orcs formed a stark contrast. The Dreenii maiden, Irel, had a strange emotion in her heart that she could not understand. She suddenly became extremely eager to see the owner of this flag. At this moment in Karazhan, Aurelia, who happened to be strolling by Duque's place, saw this scene. Yo. Not bad. I didn't think that this big flag of Duke Marcus could be used to swindle people in the Outland. The eldest sister of the Windrunner family teased Duque. Duque laughed. If it was all those brainless fell orcs, there really wouldn't be any way. Just nice, the one leading the army is Kilrog Deadeye. If it was another orc leader who was not clear-headed, he would most likely only be frightened for a moment, and would never give the order to retreat. Kilrog was different. He had inherited the memories of his previous life, and also the fear of being an orc. That was from the beginning of the second battle at the Dark Portal. No matter how he struggled, he could not succeed. No matter how he tried to change himself, he was still tortured by Duque. He could not take down the Iron Furnace fort, and was brutally abused in the final battle. Then he turned around and followed the new boss, Nazul, and was abused again. He even died next to the Dark Portal. More importantly, Kilrog was one of the rare beastmen who possessed Esper abilities. His single red eye had the ability to see the future to a certain extent, even though it could only see small fragments of the future. But all along he had relied on this ability to consolidate his power and kill in all directions. This time, without exception, he looked at the flag with his one eye, which was usually blind. As expected, he clearly felt a trace of Duque's divine power. Almost at the moment he looked over, Kilrog saw an illusory projection of Duque that was even larger than Shotrath City. In Duque's deep black eyes, there seemed to be a dazzling seven-colored flame burning in the depths of his eyes. Duque opened his mouth slightly, and the next moment, the voice of the soul that came out seemed to shake the entire Draenor world. Sargera's soul trembles under my feet. Archimon's soul was nailed to death by me on Mount Hyjal. Kilrog, who do you think you are? I'll only say this once, scram. The buzzing in the soul world triggered countless strange and blurry scenes of light. Kilrog saw at this moment that Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras, died tragically under Duque's sword. He saw the insufferably arrogant Archimon being blown to death on Mount Hyjal, and even his bones were still hanging on a withered tree. He saw the huge and boundless distorted Void Fortress being wantonly blown into pieces. It turned out that the new master that he thought was invincible actually had such a weak side. Chapter 1392. At this time Kilrog was already drenched in cold sweat. You can't possibly come to our world. You can't possibly come here. This is not your domain. It was as if he was asking himself, but also as if he was emphasizing it. It was more like an unconscious form of self-hypnosis. In his dazed state, Kilrog muttered these words over and over in a neurotic manner. What did I do wrong? No. I didn't do anything wrong. Sar was too weak. Orcs will never be slaves? Bah. What he's doing now is to turn the Horde into eternal slaves of the Alliance. This world is the territory of the orcs. It's the world of the Burning Legion. You're just a demigod from the outside world, you can't do anything. Kilrog was a smart person full of ambition. He would obey the strong, but that was under the premise that the other party had shown his decisive strength. He firmly believed that Illidan under Kil'jaeden could better fight against the detestable Alliance. So, after returning to a place he was familiar with, he brazenly chose to raise the flag of rebellion. The funny thing was that when he faced Duque again, the first thing he thought of was the terrifying days when he was dominated by Duke Marcus. Continue to charge? No way. That guy is crazy. He can even burn his own main city, so he wouldn't care about the main city of the Dreenii. The main building of Shotrath City was originally nested in the basin, and it relied on a few huge suspended tunnels for people from the outer city to directly enter the main building. If they used kerosene around the basin and set it on fire, then all the orcs in the tunnels would be finished. Chaotic memories floated into Kilrog's mind. The more he didn't want to think about it, the clearer his dusty memories became. The orcs had absolute military strength? That wasn't the first time. One fire burned the elven forest, and nearly 100,000 orcs were burned to the ground. So what if they attacked Stormwind City? Another fire burned another 100,000 of your elites. They had an overwhelming military strength, but every time hundreds of thousands of orcs would be buried at the bottom of the sea, all to be fed to the fish. Every chief knew that changes had to be made, so they tacitly agreed to Orgrim taking power. But so what? He was weakened time and time again and faced defeat time and time again. Finally he reached the end of the road. When Kilrog woke up from the mental shock, he took a deep breath and exhaled all the air in his cold lungs in one go. His vocal cords, which were nourished by shadow power, let out a tremor of fear that came from the deepest part of his soul. All troops heed my command. Retreat. Although the evil beastmen were bloodthirsty and ferocious, they weren't like the legendary berserkers who completely lost their reason and couldn't distinguish between friend and foe. The signal to retreat rang out. No matter how unwilling they were, they still had to retreat. The Draenei guards and soldiers could finally breathe a sigh of relief. They lined up the guards, and then the main force slowly retreated back into the city. A large number of civilians began to pour out. Most of them served as logistics. They carried away every compatriot who was still breathing and used holy light to treat them as much as possible. They also cleaned up every evil beastman who was still breathing. This was not something that Duque and Thomas could handle. On the other side, Imriel, who was still in a state of shock, suddenly quivered. Duque noticed the faint holy light that shone beside her ear. There's such a thing? As expected, Imriel bowed to Duque and the others. Lord Valen is aware of your arrival and is now ready to receive you. Please follow me. All right. Duque and the others were near the outer city. Originally, the fastest way to get there was through the main passage that connected the inner and outer city. Because of the war, the 50-meter-wide passageway was already filled with all kinds of war machines or temporary bunkers. To enter the inner city, it was faster to walk through the basin. Walking through the messy basin, the surroundings had become a huge military camp, or rather, a temporary shelter. There were injured Draenei soldiers and skinny civilians everywhere. It was obvious that the city had begun to implement rationing, and all resources were prioritized for the guards and soldiers who could fight. Imriel was obviously a celebrity here. Almost every Draenei knew her and greeted her. Of course, not everyone and everything was good. Imriel, when are you going to pay me back the 6 copper coins you owe me? A Draenei lady said in Draenei language. Duque could clearly see that Imriel, who had been walking briskly after defeating the orcs, was instantly petrified. Duque was speechless. Was this the so-called dark history? Or a hero stumped by a single coin? Who would have thought that the famous Imriel in history would have such an embarrassing moment? When Hoof heard this, her hair stood up on the spot. Her blue tail stood up like a cat's fur. She glanced at Duque guiltily. Seeing that Duque did not seem to be paying attention to her, she patted her chest and hurriedly replied, Mamie, I've brought these guests to Lord Valen's place. That means I've completed my mission. I'll pay you back as soon as I get the reward. Just as she sent the sisters away, the naughty Duque who was controlling Mark Dooku said, Miss Imriel, what's 6 copper coins? Do you need me to back you up? On the other side, the Missy shouted again, Imriel. Hoof immediately switched to playing dumb. What? I can't hear you. What did you say? On the other side, she grabbed Duque's hand and said, Lord Valen is still waiting for you. Quick, hero. Before she catches up to us, let's go. If it were not for the fact that it was not the right time, Duque would have rolled on the ground a few times, slapped the table and laughed out loud. Was this still the serious Draenei archbishop from his previous life? After entering the heavily guarded passage, Duque and the rest arrived at the huge hemispherical main hall. The curved walls were engraved with mysterious runes that glowed with light. A Naru who was glowing with a holy light and formed from a number of diamond-shaped blocks, was floating in the middle of the hall. Another older Draenei stood in front of the Naru. In every corner of the hall, the beautiful armor of the Draenei guards was polished until it shone brightly. Under the Naru's holy light, it looked even more holy. That older Draenei should be Valen. Standing around him were a few holy knights and guards, who bowed subtly to show their obedience to him. This obedience stems from a top-down power pyramid that is completely devoid of self-interest. Perhaps only a race like the Draenei who were completely idealistic would have such a thing. Duque respected the religious beliefs of others, even if he himself was at the top of the hierarchy. The problem was he who had received the education of the great celestial empire, was a complete materialist. Chapter 1393. In the world of Azeroth, Duque had seen many gods. There were false gods, true gods, and evil gods. The biggest feeling that these gods gave Duke wasn't that they didn't have their own ideals, but that they were more humanized. Hacker was brainless and xenophobic. See, Thun was immoral and devoured everything. Elun was willing to take care of all good creatures under the stars. None of these gods were as pure as the Naru, and none of the believers were as completely selfless as the Draenei. Now that Duque had stepped into the realm of the gods, he should be prepared to have some fanatics who worshipped him. After all, he might be like Elun in the future, needing priests to spread his faith. Perhaps the power of faith mentioned in many novels before he transmigrated would be a necessity. Although Duque understood the purpose of these people's existence, he was afraid of dealing with fanatics. Yes, I'm just Mark Dooku, a little mage in charge of delivering letters and guarding the front lines. As soon as he thought of this, Duque immediately activated secret observation mode. At this time, a few huge figures stood in front of the team. The leader was a burly Draenei in heavy armor, the shield of Valen, the personal guard of the Prophet. For safety's sake, I can only let two of you see the Prophet. Thomas was keenly aware that he, the so-called messenger, was not the target of the other party's attention. It was obvious that the scene of Duque planting the flag had stunned the Draenei. In fact, it was not just Thomas who felt this way. Even Imriel noticed that many eyes were focused on Duque. Imriel flashed a silly smile. I will wait outside. After the Prophet Valen summons you, if you still need me, I will be at your service. Thank you, Imriel. Thomas and Duque both revealed friendly smiles. Under the guidance of the shield of Valen, Thomas and Duque slowly walked over. As they walked, Thomas used small movements to tidy up his armor that he had already tidied up a few times. Duque heard Thomas muttering softly, I am now representing the Alliance. The two walked closer. Willen wasn't originally a part of Shotrath City. Valen used to live in the Shrine of Karabaer. Duque could still remember the first time he saw the Shrine of Karabaer in the game before he transmigrated. Above the shimmering sky, bright stars surrounded the bright moon, shrouding the vast land in eternal twilight. The Shrine of Karabaer was located between the vast sea and the dark plains of the Moonshadow Valley. Unfortunately, the Karabaer temple had already fallen during the war between the Draenei and the Orcs. In the original history, Nizul, who was still the great chieftain, had once opened a crack to another world in the Temple of Karabaer, which resulted in the explosion of Draenor. In this life, Nizul directly knelt in Karazhan. According to the information that Kale, that's had previously sent back, after the Orcs lost Nizul, the temple was occupied by the Lord of the Abyss, Magtheridon. Then, when Illidan was beaten up by Arthas in Northrend, he returned to the Outland and colluded with Magtheridon. The Temple of Karabaer became Illidan's lair. By the way, when it was occupied by the Orcs, the Temple of Karabaer was renamed the Temple of Darkness. Valen, who was homeless, could only temporarily hide in Shotrath City. Duque began to look at Valen, the super swindler. To be honest, no matter how many times he saw the Draenei, especially the male Draenei, Duque could easily associate them with demons. After all, they were of the same origin. The Draenei only called themselves Draenei after they split from Eridar. It was hard to imagine that the same race could give birth to the Draenei, a race of extreme light, and also evolve into the incomparably evil race of Eridar. Valen was very old. Even as a Draenei with an almost eternal lifespan, he still looked very old. Compared to the light blue skin of the Hoof Imriel, Valen's skin was more of a deep bluish purple. Because of his extremely long white eyebrows, coupled with the long beard that reached his navel, and the long blue beard on his chin that looked like 4 cow tails, for a moment, Duque thought that he was looking at a lobster man or something. The antennae, the beard, and the like were too powerful. Valen's white robe had complicated red embroidery with golden edges. Coupled with the noble and elegant purple as embellishments, and the huge back that looked like 4 torches that were taller than his head, he looked even more like a swindler. Towards these fancy things Duque did not feel anything. However, when Duque and Valen looked at each other, he was suddenly shocked. At first, Valen's gaze was extremely calm, even to the point that his gaze felt like sunlight. For countless years, months and days, it warmly shone upon every living being. His deep gaze was filled with wisdom, and it gave off a trance that could easily see through all falsehoods. However, in the next moment, the eternal calmness on Valen's face was swept away, replaced by a fleeting shock and anger. Compared to the calmness a moment ago, it was even more frightening. Even though Valen had only said one word, it was enough to raise the vigilance of Valen's shield and the guards. In less than a tenth of a breath's time, they had already unsheathed the weapons at their waist. Numerous Valen's shield had already raised their large shields, blocking in front of Valen. Everything happened too quickly, and Thomas was caught unprepared. No one expected that in the next moment, Valen and Mark, who was controlled by Duque, would raise their right hands at the same time to stop them. It's fine. The one who spoke was Valen. Have we been seen through? The one who smiled bitterly was Duque. Valen immediately made a gesture, and all the guards scattered. He turned his head and bowed slightly to Duque. Please forgive these children. In the long years that have passed, Kill Jaden has never given up on killing the Draenei. The one he hates more is me. That is why there has never been a lack of assassinations around me. I understand. Duque replied calmly, I have my difficulties as well. Can you keep what you saw a secret for me? Of course. After receiving Valen's reply, Duque turned around and faced the dumbfounded Thomas. My apologies, Brother Thomas. Actually, I am the envoy for this visit to Shotrath City. I have no choice. I have received a secret order from the highest level of the Alliance. This is a secret order from the commander of the Alliance, Lord Duke Marcus. Please check it. Duque handed a very formal document to Thomas. The document was, of course, real. It was just something that Duque had casually made up last night while controlling Mark to take a dump. Thomas, you have already completed your duties very well. Go and rest first. Let me discuss this with Lord Valen. After sending off Thomas, who had a strange expression on his face, Duque faced Valen alone. Alright, let's get straight to the point. Chapter 1394. Duque was not at all surprised that Willan could see through him. Willan was originally an Eridar. This mysterious race not only had high intelligence, but they also had talents that other races could only look up to in terms of the soul and the use of various energies. Duque could trick passers-by and trick hooves, but he definitely could not trick Willan. Willan had probably already seen through the fact that this Mark Dooku in front of him did not have a soul. Thinking of the elemental line that connected from outside Shotrath City to the forehead of this person in front of him, it would be strange if Willan did not know that this Mark Dooku was a puppet. Duque guessed that Willan had also used some special backtracking methods to find out that he was a demigod or something. It was very magical. Even after Willan had done so much, Duque still did not feel touched in Karazhan's defense system or his own spiritual senses. This method was also amazing. As expected, he could not underestimate the heroes of the world. At this time Willan spoke. The 4 lobster-like tentacles on his chin made Duque's balls ache. Was this 4 blue balls glued to his chin? I did not see through everything, but I deduced that it was you. Alright, honorable guest, how should I address you? Just call me Mark Dooku. But the agreement I reached with you will be sent over in the form of an official document from Fort Glory within 3 days. Duque was still very careful. He did not doubt the loyalty of Willan's subordinates, but the Burning Legion's methods of gathering intelligence had nothing to do with loyalty. Any detail could be analyzed and a lot of things could be calculated. Mark Dooku was not a suitable chess piece to be exposed at this time. If there was no direct video and first-hand information, then Duque, who could not leave Azeroth, could only command blindly if he really wanted to. When Willan heard Duque's words, there was an obvious sense of relief on his face. The situation of the Draenei was too bad. It should be said that they had not been well for the past 30 years. Recently, with Illidan becoming the king of the Outland, the situation of the Draenei had worsened. It wasn't that Willan hadn't come into contact with the Alliance from the alien planet called Azeroth. In his eyes, the Draenei were the natural allies of the Draenei, who had fought against the Old Horde and fought against the Burning Legion. He was also confident that he could convince any of the higher-ups of the Alliance. The problem was, if he couldn't even meet them, he would be in despair. Kale, that took good care of the Draenei, but Kale, that sent a division to Shotrath City and ran to the Draenei's spaceship. The Draenei's retreat was important, but Shotrath City was also crucial. The most troublesome thing was that Valen learned from the astrologer who had defected to them that the seemingly powerful Prince Kale, that didn't have much say in the powerful alliance. The alliance was a union formed by a bunch of countries of different races. The foundation of the alliance was the kingdoms, so each king or leader would have a certain degree of say. The race with the largest number of kingdoms was the humans, who were the core race of the alliance. And above all the kings was the commander who was jointly elected by the kings of the various countries. That was the human mage Duke Marcus from Stormwind. Valen was very happy that the alliance was made up of the Church of Holy Light, who also believed in the Holy Light. But there was another problem. Only a king called Kalia Menethil believed in the Holy Light, and Kalia was almost a mascot in Kale, that's words. Most of the power of the alliance was in the hands of the mages and warrior leaders. What else could Valen do? It was very difficult for him too. Due to the inconvenience of transportation and communication difficulties, he barely knew that the Alliance and the so-called New Horde had begun an expedition to Draenor through the astrologer's intermittent magic transmission. He also heard that it was the king of Stormwind City who had come. Valen was both happy and nervous. For the arrival of the Alliance, Valen could be said to have painstakingly prepared a lot of materials. Originally, Valen was already very happy to be able to get on William's good side. Who knew that after using his soul to backtrack, he would find out that the master of the puppet in front of him was actually the only demigod in the alliance. Valen was so excited that his hands were almost trembling. Although due to the situation I was unable to reach a face-to-face exchange, I am still very grateful to the alliance's commander, His Excellency Duke Marcus, for taking this seriously. I am the one who is embarrassed that I can't come personally. Then before we officially talk, I hope to show you something, His Excellency, the older Drenii said softly. He stretched his body and floated up. The prophet maintained a height of about 10 centimeters above the complicated and gorgeous patterns on the ground of Shotrath City. He approached Mark and tried to press his palm between Mark's eyebrows. I'm very sorry for this action. To achieve telepathy this is necessary, the prophet said. Duque was curious. Is it about Argus? Or is it about the period when you were one of the 3 heads of Eridar? Valen was struck by lightning. He was struck by lightning. One had to know that at this point in time, the Drenii's contact with the Alliance was simply too one-sided. Many of the big shots in the Alliance had not even seen a living Drenii. They had only seen the fragments of the magic mirror from Kale, that's. In addition, there were not many people from Eridar in the Burning Legion. Even Archimonde, his appearance had changed a lot under the dark energy change. Most of the Alliance had no way to connect the Burning Legion demons with a pair of bat wings with the Drenii. And the ones they were fighting on the front lines were still their old enemies, the Fell Orcs. Who would have thought that Duke would reveal Valen's background right from the start? That was not all. There was more to come. Don't be surprised. I once went back 10,000 years ago through the Bronze Dragon King Nozdormu, who controls time in Azeroth. There was a small mistake that time and I mixed into the Burning Legion. I faced Kill Jaden's main body. I also know the grudge between Kill Jaden and you and your people. So, in the matter of fighting against the Burning Legion, our interests are absolutely the same. If there are no major problems, I will represent the Alliance to invite the Drenii to join. Wait. Happiness came too suddenly, and Valen simply did not know what to do. For the past 25,000 years, the Drenii had been hunted down and defeated again and again. It was fine if they were not a match for the Burning Legion. When they came to Draenor, they continued to be beaten by the Orcs. After the Orcs were finished, Illidan continued to beat them. In the eyes of many of the Alliance's higher-ups, the Drenii were scum. Small population, weak combat power. In Kale, that's report, it only mentioned that helping the Drenii could gain an advantage in the war in Draenor. After all, the enemy of the enemy was an ally. He never mentioned inviting the Drenii to join. Well, Duque came up and said, Bro, don't even think about it. The Alliance and you are destined to be brothers. It was as if Valen had prepared for today's exam for several years, memorized countless books and imagined countless possibilities. In the end, Duque just said, no time to explain, get in the car. Chapter 1395. Valen was still in a daze. He could not believe his ears. Didn't the Drenii need the Alliance? Of course they needed it. The intermittent encirclement of the beastmen and demons had already pushed the Drenii to the brink of collapse. Now the remaining Drenii were not even 1% of the original number. It seemed like the price of recovering Shotrath City was the loss of almost all the young adults. Look, once they walked out of this hemispherical hall, they could see dying tribesmen everywhere in the residential area. They moaned weakly in the dirty and smelly muddy water, quietly waiting for the arrival of the Grim Reaper. Holy Light was not omnipotent. Holy Light could heal wounds and soothe the soul, but Holy Light could not solve malnutrition, could not let people regrow lost limbs, and could not kill the parasites that had burrowed into the body. Although Valen did not doubt that if those evil and dirty beastmen invaded the residential area, his dying brethren would teach the invaders what willpower was and what a desperate counterattack was, this could not stop this from being the best manifestation of the cruel reality of dying struggle. 25,000 years of fleeing did not shatter Willen's incomparably tenacious heart. If he were to fall, there would be no one else who knew the Burning Legion's background like he did. He could not fall, even if his tribesmen were all dead, even if he was the only one left. At this time he learned about the Alliance, and that there was a world in this world that the Burning Legion could not even touch. Even the astrologer of Shotrath City showed him a short video of the Burning Legion's invasion, including Archimonde's corpse hanging on the World Tree's severed limb on Mount Hyjal. Back then, in order to boost morale, the Alliance played this video on repeat in the main cities of the Alliance for 3 months. Of course, Valen recognized that this was his old friend, Archimonde, who was at loggerheads with him back then. From that day onwards, Valen was mentally prepared to hug his thigh. Again, happiness came too suddenly and he really didn't dare to believe it. After a short silence, there was a flash of joy. Valen bowed deeply. On behalf of 300,000 Drenii, I thank the Alliance for their generosity and acceptance. This is the honor of the Drenii. 300,000 was definitely a rough estimate. The Drenii had been killed off a long time ago, and were chased everywhere by the beastmen like ducks. Duque truly wondered if there were still 100,000 sane Drenii. Of course, Duque did not doubt that Willan had a special way to communicate with his people. For example, the twin emperors. F***ck, that kind of precise number, which was accurate down to the single digit, had almost scared Duque out of his wits when he had first reported it. Of course, Duque would not deny this number. For a human population of tens of millions, even if all the Drenii went to Azeroth, they wouldn't even cause a ripple. That's easy. All countries in the Alliance are equal, and the Drenii are no exception. Let the subordinates discuss the specific details. Now that the connection to the magic network is good, you can tell us if you have any requests. The Alliance will try our best to satisfy you. Food. Valen blurted out. As if he was afraid that Duque did not understand the severity of the problem, Valen emphasized, a large amount of food. The war destroyed all production. We've lost all our fields, so we can only send a small number of our compatriots through the secret tunnel every day to gather food in the forests outside the orcs' control. Food, right? How much do you want? The first batch, I hope to have 100 tons, and the sooner the better. As you wish. At this moment, Dumuk's level shot up from 0 to 100. He did not even need to blink. Dumuk, magic lamp possession. He heard Duque snap his fingers, and the next moment, a few dimensional bags suddenly opened beside Duque. Clang, 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 the sound of hard objects falling to the ground was continuous. Rectangular strips about 20 centimeters long, shining with golden light, fell out of the void. In just a few blinks of an eye, they had already piled up into a small mountain in front of Valen. Duque smiled. Please call Hoof. Imriel here. Valen nodded almost imperceptibly. Naturally, there were servants who called in Hoof, who was wandering outside the hall, staring at Thomas while simultaneously activating secret observation mode. Hoof was curious. She looked calm on the surface, but her cheerful footsteps and large swishing of her tail betrayed her mood. What calmness! It was obvious that he had eagerly rushed over. Teacher Valen, you called for me? Imriel was a little excited but also a little nervous. Valen looked at his young disciple with a loving gaze. Ambassador Dooku is looking for you. Hoof turned her head and blinked her eyes. Is there anything I can help you with? Duque smiled without saying a word. He snapped his fingers again, and a 50 centimeters long, 25 centimeters wide, and 20 centimeters tall thing that looked a little like an ice basin formed in front of the Drenii. At the same time, he also communicated with the water elemental plane and poured a basin of water into it. Although the taste will not be too good, it is indeed made from high-quality food. After saying that, Duque casually picked up a piece of gold and tore off the surface wrapping, revealing a solid brown piece. Duque casually threw it into the pool. At first, it was nothing, but soon the small brick at the bottom of the pool began to react with the water, and bubbles kept coming out. Plop plop. The strange sound attracted the attention of the surrounding Drenii. In less than 30 seconds, the small piece of brick greedily absorbed the water at a speed visible to the naked eye, and became a big soft cake that almost burst the ice basin. Duque made a gesture of invitation. A Valen shield stepped forward, broke off a small piece and put it in his mouth. Soon, a smile appeared on his rough face. I tasted wheat, eggs and a few plant seasonings. It is quite nutritious. Almost as soon as he finished speaking, Imriel's tail spun like a windmill. Let me try it too? With light steps, Imriel also broke off a piece. It tastes good. Why did you say it did not taste good? At this moment, in Karazhan, Duque slapped his forehead, his face full of bitter smiles. Aurelia, who was beside him, touched his nose and smiled faintly. Whether it tasted good or bad was relative. As a transmigrator, Duque's understanding of modern warfare definitely surpassed that of the world of Azeroth. He had long proposed the concept of compressed biscuits. Before Duque transmigrated, the humans and dwarves of the Azeroth all ate bread as their staple food. But during the two large-scale battles across the sea, bread was too troublesome and took up too much space. So, Duque insisted on adding things like compressed biscuits and canned fish to the logistics. To be honest, these were all warehouse goods from a few years ago, but the Drenii treated them like treasures. Chapter 1396. As a fan of the puppet army before his transmigration, and a commander who had personally led troops through many battles, Duque was well aware of how tough it was for the soldiers. Think about it. After a whole day of battle, the soldiers would be lying in the trenches or in the camp on the bloody battlefield. They would even have to soak their feet in the mud when the weather was bad. However, after a bloody battle, they would often be given a piece of black bread that was not much bigger than a palm. When this black thing did not get wet, it could be used as a brick to hit people. Although it was a staple food for the poor in this era, it was only the lowest form of protection for soldiers who desperately needed to recover their strength. It was better than nothing. Hence, after the Dark Portal defeated Arthas' Calamity army on the Lordaeron continent in 15 years, Duque took control of the alliance and proposed to make the first batch of compressed biscuits. Duque thought of a way to get the dwarves to mix the flour, and then compress it into a small piece. Alright, it had to be said that the dwarves were very capable. He still remembered the first time he saw the finished product. Duque ran over to take a bite and almost broke his teeth on the spot. He finally managed to cut a small piece and smashed it with a hammer only to vomit on the spot. What the hell is this black thing? Magni shrugged. Probably engine oil? Lang looked down on Duque's lack of knowledge. Don't worry, a little engine oil won't kill anyone. When those bastards down there don't have any alcohol to drink, they still steal engine oil and mix it with water to drink. Duque rolled his eyes. These bastards thought that they had a long HP and high HP, so they were courting death. However, what the two dwarves said was the truth. During the second battle at the Dark Portal, when the Iron Stove Castle was facing a food crisis, there were still many fellows who shouted that they could go without food, but not without alcohol. Only later did they find out that the compressed biscuits were indeed compressed enough. The damn dwarves actually used a press to press the compressed biscuits, and didn't even wipe off the oil stains. Duque spent a full 3 weeks to make this bunch of violent dwarves understand that the compressed biscuits could be given to the frontline soldiers. It must be able to bite through, and there must be no impurities. It must also be waterproof and moisture-proof. Of course, this was a thing of the past. Now, the Alliance's standard military rations had been improved to the 5th version. Compressed biscuits, sealed packaged flour, canned soybeans, canned pickled dace, canned beef jerky. Most importantly, the Alliance had developed canned soup that could automatically heat up with a pull of a rope, as well as instant noodles that had poisoned countless youths before Duque's transmigration. With the addition of all kinds of new military stoves, they could eat freshly baked white bread when conditions permitted. If there were no other conditions, he could use clean water that had been filtered through a strainer to boil it. Hot soup and instant noodles would definitely not be a problem. In order to facilitate transportation, the Alliance had made many things standardized, such as boxes for storing artillery shells and canned military rations. Furthermore, the types of weapons were reduced, such as the size of the cannonballs and melee weapons. Only in terms of food there were more and more varieties. The beef jerky alone had 5 different flavors. No matter how conservative the commanders were, they had to admit that the morale of the soldiers was much higher than before. In the past, after a big battle, the soldiers were all like dead dogs, but now they were full of energy the next day. Back then, after the battle, we only had black bread. Instead of being hacked to death by the enemy on the battlefield, we almost choked to death on our own rations. The Alliance officers who were now lieutenants and colonels complained about this the most to the soldiers. Undeniably, because of these little things that the nobles and officers couldn't see, the Alliance's support for Duque had always been full. The Drenii temporarily wouldn't be able to experience this benefit. Of course, to prevent the Drenii from grumbling in their hearts when they found out the truth, Duque decided to give them a heads up first. To be honest, these foods were eliminated by the Alliance. Because of the high compression ratio, they are the most convenient to carry in spatial storage bags. Considering that you Drenii urgently need food, we use this method. Duque said apologetically. Valen used the holy light to examine it once, and a bright smile appeared on his face. No. Being able to fill our stomachs and survive is already the greatest gift to the Drenii. I thank Commander Duke Marcus on behalf of my people. For a moment, Duque thought he was hearing things. It sounded like the voice of someone with a high favorability rating. He took the time to glance at the system. Wasn't it close? He found that his reputation rating in Shotrath City had jumped from indifferent to reverent. Needless to say, this time he almost moved himself. To use the food that the Alliance had accumulated for 6 to 7 years and was about to expire to give a favor, and then gain a huge boost in reputation, this was a good deal. Imriel, please distribute this food to your people. Duque turned and said to the hoof, who knew that when he turned around, Duque almost burst out laughing. Although the hoof was full of energy, it was actually starving, or it could be said that the food in Shotrath City was too bad, causing it to be gluttonous. What happened to the food test? What the hell, eating until both sides of your cheeks are full, what the hell is this? After noticing Duque's gaze, the hoof was so scared that it choked. It grabbed its neck with both hands, looking like a ghost that was about to hang itself. Woo, help. Duque was speechless. He also did not know how he understood. Anyway, he first passed a pot of water to Imriel and let her gulp it down, then helped her to pat her back a few times. Only then did she gulp down the food. Hoo, I almost thought I was going to choke to death. The hoof kept patting her chest. Duque noticed that she was choking on her tears. Valen, who was at the side, held his forehead. He was speechless, as if saying, "Why did I teach such a disciple?" "Excuse me." Valen could only smile bitterly. Duque thought of something. "No, it's okay. Imriel's behavior reminded me. A person who has been starving for too long, suddenly overeating will cause sudden death. So even if the food is distributed, please slowly increase it." Valen was slightly stunned, and the gratitude in his heart increased. A person who can think of such details is indeed a person whose heart is filled with holy light. Duque was speechless. All right, a few words can bring up the topic of holy light again. I, who was seriously discussing scientific knowledge with a fraud, feel so helpless. On the other side, Duque and Valen were discussing the next step of cooperation. On the other side, Imriel, surrounded by the guards, had already begun to distribute food. "We have already joined the Alliance from the world of Azeroth. This alliance has defeated the Horde more than once. They even killed the first chief of the Horde, Black Hand. The Alliance has just sent people to deliver food. Everyone has it, no need to squeeze." On this day, countless Draenei were in tears. Chapter 1397. Who was the one crying tears of joy? Who was the one cheering for the seemingly ordinary food? There was only one answer: the Draenei. The Draenei were too bitter. They had been chased by their former compatriots for over 20,000 years, wandering everywhere with nowhere to hide. Almost every planet they went to, there would be burning legions void battleships chasing after them. Forget about 1,000 years of peace, it was already good enough to have 50 years. Many times, the civilizations and races they encountered were weaker than them. They could not help them resist the burning legion. In order not to screw them over, they would even take the initiative to leave those planets with intelligent beings. How could they be like today, receiving shelter and protection from a powerful force? From the astrologers who had already become a branch of Shotrath City, they had heard of the powerful legends of the Alliance. Now, it seemed like they were lucky enough to be witnesses to this invincible legend. Be careful not to choke. If you've been hungry for too long, your stomach won't be able to take it if you suddenly eat too much. She had a serious expression on her face, as if the person who had just choked on the food was not her, but some passerby. Fortunately, the Draenei all believed in the holy light. Even the apprentices from Karabeir's temple had a sense of blind obedience. Both adults and children were hungry, but they were very disciplined. There was no crowding, no fighting, and everyone lined up to wait for Imriel and the others to distribute the food. Do you see that? There are many tons of food there, enough for us to eat for a month. Hold on for another week or two, and the Alliance will open up a path from Hellfire Peninsula to Shotrath City. The Draenei listened to Duque's little suggestion, and took the mountain of compressed biscuits and soft food that looked like puffed cakes and patrolled one round around Shotrath City. With food in their hands, they did not panic. The Draenei were famous for their resilience. Now they were even more confident that they could defend their main city. At the entrance of the main hall, the shield of Valen surrounded Valen and Duque, standing side by side. Valen looked at this scene and felt a lot of emotions. I really didn't expect this. There are many things that you didn't expect. The Draenei joining the Alliance is a win-win for all of Azeroth and the Draenei. The Alliance needs your technology and the guidance of the Holy Light. You need the Alliance's combat power and protection. We are natural allies, aren't we? Indeed. Valen nodded. Nothing could be more beautiful than this union. One had to know that within the Alliance, the Church of Holy Light was a pillar that transcended nations and races. Even though the Night Elves had the protection of Elun, the Holy Light Church was still the main force in the Alliance. Coincidentally, ever since Alonso's and Uther died, the position of Archbishop of Holy Light had been vacant. Duque immediately suggested that the great trickster Willan should take this position. They were of different races but their beliefs were the same. In addition, educating outsiders was a great honor for the Drenii. How could Valen refuse? His heart that was hanging in the air had long since been put down. As long as the Alliance sent reinforcements, they would be able to announce that Delaney had perfectly merged into the Alliance. Praise the Holy Light. Praise the Alliance. Long live the Prophet. Now that he was full, if he didn't roar, how could he be worthy of this ecstasy and joy? The entire Shotrath city was boiling. The noise spread thousands of meters away, and the entire Fel Orc camp could hear the unique cheers of the Drenii. Kilrog Deadeye knew that Shotrath city wouldn't be able to be conquered by just relying on him and his Fel Orc army. He was also suffering. When he first joined Illidan, the first order that Illidan gave him was a death order. But in the past few days he couldn't contact Illidan at all. His new master seemed to have disappeared from the face of the earth. The command center of the entire Outland army was completely paralyzed, and the commanders of each place were fighting their own battles. Magtheridon asked for help from the Dark Temple, but the Dark Temple ignored him. He asked for help from Vasht's Naga army in Zangarmarsh to the west, but Vasht said that without Illidan's orders she could only continue to carry out her original orders and extract the lake water from the swamp. As the saying goes, every family has its own problems. At this time the tribe was also in trouble. In the frontline camp outside Hellfire Citadel, Thrall looked up at the sky. The Azeroth sky and earth seemed to be a distant memory, far away in his mind. All he could see was the endless darkness in the sky, torn apart by the occasional flash of light or mysterious energy. Seeing the stalwart figure beside him, Thrall asked, "What's the situation?" "There are a lot of casualties, but more importantly our food supply can't keep up." The dead man had no expression to speak of, but Orgrim's voice was full of shame. "It's all my fault. I should have known that the situation would be worse than I thought." He thought that when he returned to his hometown, the tribe with the orcs as the core would be fighting on home ground. He didn't expect that his hometown was still his hometown, but it had long changed beyond recognition. Even with the addition of the goblins, the tribe's supply method was still primitive. It was the kind of gathering local materials and then consuming the surrounding natural resources like locusts. 23 years ago, in the era when Orgrim left, it was still possible to hunt near the Dark Portal, despite the lack of resources. Now the land was completely barren, and even if there were monsters wandering around, most of them were demonized creatures that had been seriously contaminated by dark energy. There really weren't many prey that could be eaten. It wasn't that demonized creatures couldn't be eaten, but the problem was that eating them would make them more and more like Fel Orcs, and that was completely putting the cart before the horse. Originally, Thrall had also asked Kilrog and the other orcs who came from the Dark Portal later, but he didn't expect them to have ulterior motives. They actually lied and said that they were not much different from Orgrim's time. If the tribe could learn from the Alliance and use elite tactics, they might be able to reduce the pressure by reducing the number of soldiers. The point was that they couldn't. Ask the Alliance for help. I'm willing to bet that Duque calculated that we would have a problem with supplies, so he must have reserved our share. Orgrim gritted his teeth. This wasn't hatred, it was more like helplessness. None of the tribe leaders could blame Duque, because before they passed through the Dark Portal, Duque had specially asked William to ask if they wanted to prepare supplies for the tribe. Of course, supplies were not free, and the tribe needed to exchange more ore and resources. There's no other way. That's the only way. Thrall sighed. He had long noticed that the tribe was being invaded by the Alliance's economy and culture. Ever since the ceasefire and forming an alliance with the Alliance, he had been paying attention to boosting the tribe's race soul and reducing the invasion of the Alliance's various values and social views. Now it seemed that he had failed. Half a day later, the canned beef from the Alliance arrived from Fort Glory. There was a burst of enthusiastic cheers in the tribe's camp. This made Thrall feel even more defeated. Chapter 1398. Everyone was a natural foodie. The life of eating raw meat and drinking blood sounded heroic, but one would only know how bitter it was after living it. Without oil, salt, soy sauce, and vinegar, the prey they hunted would at most be roasted and eaten. How could this compare to the cumin-infused barbecue of the Alliance? Recently, when the tribe faced a disaster, it was the Alliance that provided them with food. In order to reduce wastage when crossing the ocean, canned food was of course the priority. In the tribal camp, Sal saw with his own eyes how a newly matured tribal warrior chose his favorite flavor and then skillfully opened the can. Look, Orgrim. Now, even those kids know how to use canning knives to open alliance cans. Sal sighed. Orgrim was silent for a moment. Even though he was already a dead man, he still felt a heavy sense of duty on his shoulders. The Horde cannot defeat the Alliance, not even with all the orcs in our world. If you fall behind, you will be beaten. Thrall squeezed the words out of his mouth. The Alliance is not using force now, but they are gradually doing what Tyreena's wanted to do in the past. Turn orcs into slaves. In other words, he wanted to assimilate the orcs, trolls and Tauren races into the Alliance. This unstoppable trend was the most terrifying. The Alliance was already ahead of the Horde in economic, military and political fields. In addition, there was a huge difference in population and country size between the two sides, as well as the fact that the leader of the Alliance was a demigod who didn't age or die. Under normal circumstances, the tribe would have no chance at all. Unless, the two tribal elders instantly thought of the same thing. But as soon as their eyes met, they looked away. That's right. Unless the Alliance changed and suffered a crushing defeat, it had to be something like Duque dying in battle and the Alliance collapsing. But neither of them would forget the principle of being in the same boat. If the Alliance lost like this, they would definitely have lost to the Burning Legion. Perhaps this was a chance for the Horde to rise up, but it was more likely that the Horde would be destroyed along with the Alliance. As long as the tribe leader wasn't an idiot, he wouldn't purposely make this happen. So, do your best. It was November 2nd. On this day, good news finally came from the Allied army. William led half of the Alliance's hero team to kill the Lord of the Abyss, Magtheridon. 2 days later, the main force of the Horde conquered the entire Hellfire Citadel. At this point, the first goal of the Allied forces had been achieved. There were two general directions in front of the Allied forces. The first was to charge west into Zangermarsh. If they could open up the swamp, then the Allied army's choices would become more plentiful. They could turn north into Blade Peak and chase after those traitors who betrayed the tribe. Finally, they could go further north to the Nether Storm, and settle all the unstable factors. They could also head south of the swamp and enter Nagrand, where most of the normal orcs lived. The second was to enter Terakar Forest from the southwest. He would completely establish a connection with the Draenei, and then use Shotrath City as a base and supply transfer point. However, the following march would not be easy. This was because the Auchinton area in the southern part of the Taroka Forest was completely out of control. There were a large number of undead creatures, Illidan's lackeys and the Crowmen. Of course, they could directly attack Moonshadow Valley from the east of Shotrath City, where Illidan's lair, the Black Temple, was located. But if he did that, he would run the risk of his retreat being cut off. Because Vashj could easily ambush the Allied army's supply line. No army could withstand this kind of attack from the front and back. However, the Allied army could not avoid it at all. From Fort Glory to Shotrath City, Duque and his party could be said to have a smooth journey. That was under the premise that the Nagas did not make a move. Because on the road from the Thorn Cliffs to Shotrath City, not far to the north was Lake Hermia. That lake was connected to Zangermarsh. Within 5 kilometers of the water, it was definitely the Nagas' world. In the Allied army meeting, the leaders of the Alliance and the Horde were all worried. Don't you have Nagas in the Alliance? How about letting them go into the swamp and fight with that Vashj? Orgrim would never forget how the elites of the Blackrock clan under his command were tortured to the point of crying for their parents 20 years ago. It was the same in South Shore, and it was the same in the Hinterland Seaview Cliff. Varian smiled bitterly and shook his head. I've already asked. I've also asked Duque to borrow that Naga. Did Duque refuse? Sal asked. No, the point is that Duque thinks that Vashj is likely to be a demigod. He doesn't have any good suggestions to give us. This time the faces of the leaders did not look good. They were good at fighting on land and barely passable in air battles. When it came to water battles, they could only be a group of salted fish shouting 666 at the side. Even with underwater breathing magic, it was useless. Did they have to go into the water wearing metal cans? There was no need to fight, they would sink directly to the bottom of the water. Once the duration of the magic ended, they could only type GG amidst the laughter of the Nagas. Can we only find a breakthrough from Taroka? Orgrim muttered. Varian let out a breath of turbid air. Fandral, in the name of the commander of the Alliance Expeditionary Army, I order you to lead the Cenarian Expeditionary Army and build a forward base just past the Thornfang region. You will think of a way to deal with Vashj's Naga troops. At the very least, you must restrain her. Fandral Staghelm said bitterly. Ever since Du made a small report before Isra left, Fandrel's position in the Cenarian Assembly had become a little unstable. Tyrant had sent him to the Outland with a single order. Under the double pressure he had no choice but to obey. Alright, it was not wrong to let the druids deal with the underwater creatures. After all, only the druids could transform into seals and have underwater combat power. Ignoring the constipated Fandrel, the Alliance and the Horde began to discuss the defense of Taroka. The final result of the discussion was that the Alliance would defend Lake Hermia in the north of Taroka Forest, be responsible for transforming Shotrath City, and build a fortress at the entrance of the Moon Shadow Valley to prevent Illidan's counterattack. The Horde would focus on attacking the Ochantan area and opening up the road to Nagran so that more orcs could join the Alliance. This plan did not seem fair at all. The Alliance had to divide their forces and the burden was also heavy. As the leader, one had to have the responsibility of leading. Now that the Alliance was stronger, this was the only way. In Karazhan, Duque finished reading the copy of the conference report sent by Varian, threw it aside and rubbed his eyebrows. I didn't expect Vashj to become such a huge problem. On the surface, once the road to Nagran was opened, it was possible to take 1,000,000 Horde troops and ignore Vashj and directly attack the Black Temple. But in reality that was not the case. In the Outland, the teleportation portal was quite unstable. At most, Duque could open up a teleportation portal that was specifically connected to Shotrath City, but he could not guarantee a teleportation portal that continued to the front lines of the Moon Shadow Valley. Without a guarantee of supplies, he could not expect the frontline soldiers to have any combat power. I still have to deal with Vashj first. Chapter 1399. Duque never felt that Vashj was very strong. Even in the game before he transmigrated, the team led by Duque only took about 3 days to complete the first kill. In the reality of this life, Vashj became a big problem. If a Naga was more than 5 kilometers away from any large body of water, their strength would greatly decrease. Not only because they were aquatic creatures, but also because there was too little water in the air, which would directly affect the strength of the female Naga's magic. In water battles, Vashj, who was probably already a demigod, was almost unbeatable. As long as they stayed in deep enough water, in theory only the deep-sea giants could fight the Naga. The deep-sea giants did have a boss called Morogrim Tidewalker, but the problem was that he was also in the Serpent Shrine. He was Vashj's underling. Above Vashj, only Queen Azhara and the ancient god Enzoth were above her. Alright, they were all wearing the same pair of pants. The Naga's lower body was in the shape of a snake and did not wear pants. Sorry. If Duque could descend into the Serpent Shrine, Duque had at least a 90% chance of killing Vashj alone. Yet he dared to come and kill. Jaden dared to descend and block him. Duque did not have the guts to fight CEO Egg, whose strength was 100% or even full of rage, in a place without anti-Titan and anti-Burning Legion formations. That would be courting death. Perhaps in the original history because of this reason, there were not many big shots in the Alliance who appeared in the Outland War. Yet, the geographical location of Zangarmarsh was too important. One Vashj was like a sword of Damocles hanging on the neck of the Alliance army, ready to cut down at any time. Duque felt a headache coming on. Whatever, at most, I'll just have to pretend and let Fandrel take the blame. The entire month was spent in the Alliance army's rest and strategic shift. On the 5th of November, at the easternmost side of Zangarmarsh, Fandrel personally went down to direct the arrangements and build the Cenarian camp. On the same day, Jaina was overseeing the blasted land, while Anastrian was at the Hellfire Peninsula. The two Breaking Dawns worked together to open the dark portal to the maximum, and finally transported the Alliance's most advanced road opener over. The so-called road opener was actually something similar to a road roller. But it was more violent and larger. Even if it had been dismantled and transported, it still brought a heavy burden to the portal. This was because the roller in front of the road roller was as tall as a 5-story building and as wide as 16 horse carriages. Think about it. A 5-story building was falling on you. What kind of earth-shattering feeling was that? The dwarves' current steel forging technology was not up to standard, and they could not make such a large roller. Black technology was never something that could be achieved in a single leap. If they couldn't form it in one piece, the dwarves could do it like building a ship. They could use rivets to fasten the bent steel plates together and weld them. As a result, a gigantic creature was born. Coupled with the Alliance's latest, slap-you-in-the-face diesel engine, this kind of road opener would definitely be shocking to drive. Wasn't that so? Anyone who had been inhaled by the black smoke from the chimney would feel like they had rolled dozens of times in a coal yard. Only a dwarf would dare to use such an environmentally unsound and inefficient thing. In any case, since the day this thing was born, Duque had forbidden it from entering any of the main cities of the Alliance other than the Steel Furnace Fort. What kind of joke was this? If they were sprayed by this thing, all humans and animals would die, and there would be no need to plant crops. But there was nothing Duque could do. The diesel was still the latest product and the quality was terrible. The diesel engine was about the same, just one level higher than the steam engine. Alright, the Allied army could not go west. The entire Hellfire Peninsula was surrounded by air forces, and even if they flew over, they would be suspended in the void. With nothing to do, an army of 100,000 killed all the monsters southwest of Fort Honor in a week, and the steel-toothed marauders could only be found in the specimen room. After leaving Fort Honor, they went southwest, passed through the warp plains and arrived at the Thorn Path. The road opener only took 3 days. The intersecting, steel-hard, scalp-numbing thicket of thorns gave off a continuous series of explosions under the pressure of the road opener. Weren't you very hard? Weren't you not afraid of fire? Come. Who's afraid of who in a head-on fight? After the unreasonable road roller rolled over, the diesel bulldozer went up, and the dwarven construction team followed to pave the road and bridge. In any case, after 3 days of rumbling, they finally opened up a wide road that was comparable to the Glorious Avenue. In the Thorn Cliff, Duque, Thomas, Imriel, and a dozen Dreenii stood on the side of the road. Seeing the huge road opener completely flattening the thorn forest, which was once the Dreenii's forbidden land, Imriel and the others were stunned. Is this the strength of the Alliance? Imriel's tail kept spinning, and the curiosity of a young girl was evident on her face. Ah, the Dreenii's technology level is actually very high. It's just that you lack energy. To be honest, Duque had his eyes on their black technology. If they could solve the problem of energy supply, the Dreenii's interstellar warships and whatnot would be high-end. Compared to the Dreenii, Azeroth's so-called latest diesel-flying battleship was nothing. Although Duque would protect the Dreenii, he must also get his hands on their technology. But now was not the time. Duque could not bring himself to ask them to sell their bodies, land, and ancestral graves as soon as they entered the Alliance. Moreover, before confirming that the Alliance had the strength to fight against the Burning Legion, Willen, that old faker, would not give them any solid information. At this time, Duque and the others saw the mission officer of Glory Fort, and a damn dwarf with a particularly strong aura, the first person in the Alliance's mechanized forces, Bulang Bronzebeard. He was not the king, but most of the time his authority was greater than the king's, because most of the Alliance's new weapons were created by him. Seeing such an important person walking over, how could Thomas not be nervous? He is. Imriel asked softly, and at the same time, half of her body hid behind Duque and pulled on Duque's robe. Oh, the dwarf Prince Bulang Bronzebeard, an important person. But it's okay, he's easy to get along with, Duque replied softly. Oh, you're the one with an outstanding battle record, the one who led a small team to make contact with Shotrath City, Mark Dooku? I heard that you were also the one who surveyed and evaluated the terrain. Bulang came over and handed over a flat metal bottle. Needless to say, that must be Bulang's collection of strong liquor. Dwarves did not beat around the bush. Giving you liquor meant that they thought highly of you and wanted to make friends with you. Friendship was deep and one gulp was enough. Duke didn't say anything and gulped it all down in one gulp. His face was not red and he was not out of breath. Mage boy, you have a good alcohol tolerance. Bulang gave a thumbs up. This is my special brew. It's 80 degrees and a normal human would pass out in 2 mouthfuls. The Dalajan mages are very slow, saying that it will affect the brain, and they won't drink it no matter what. It's not interesting at all. Duque laughed. This was not his real body. All the food that entered the artificial stomach would be stirred, and it would not affect the body at all. It turned out that by controlling the artificial humans, one could pretend to be the god of wine. Duque smiled slightly. I was born. That you're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.